Right, good morning everyone. First of all, thank you for everyone joining this morning's webinar, where we're going to talk about cyber essentials, particularly focusing on data security and GDPR. So today we have myself, Simon G, Business Development Manager at ACUTEC, and I'm also joined by Amy Stanishevsky, our Digital Marketing Specialist.
Hello everybody.
Who's really been responsible for putting today's event on, so thank you very much. The way that we're going to run this is we're going to do about 15 minutes-ish of myself and Amy going through our perspective of GDPR, data security, cyber essentials, whatever name you want to put on it. We have had situations where there's been lots of questions afterwards, so we want to try and kind of let you put your questions to us as well in the half an hour that we've allotted today. Okay. Please bear in mind that this is a bit of a whistle-stop tour of it, as we've got sort of 15, 20 minutes or 30 minutes if you like. Okay. So the first question that we're going to ask is what is GDPR really? And before we even answer what is GDPR, perhaps some of the positive aspects. I think there's been a lot of negative press about GDPR. A lot of it related to fines. You're not allowed to do this anymore, you're not allowed to do that anymore, and suddenly how is your business going to function with these new legislations? So Amy, do you want to kind of answer that question of really how we see GDPR and what it is?
Yeah, so I guess the best way to put it is the Data Protection Act in the UK, so there's the Data Protection Directive and Data Protection Act, and one's for EU and one's for UK. The one in the UK came into place in 1998, which is 20 years ago. So when you think about how much has changed in the past 20 years in terms of technology, how data is used, you know, if you'd have said who are the most, in terms of resource, what's the most valuable resource 20, 30 years ago, you would have said oil. It would have been companies like BP and Shell. Now it's data, and it's companies like Apple and Facebook and Google, and within that there is Microsoft, of course, and because of that a lot of changes had to happen, because at the end of the day the legislation that we have in place is out of date. Within that as well, of course, a lot of people are probably on here because of the fines, because that is what everybody is concerned about. So if you're not aware of that, if you are seen to be not compliant with GDPR, you can be fined up to 4% of your annual global turnover, or 20 million euros, whichever is greater. Which I think is what a lot of people are concerned about. But today we just want to kind of put that scaremongering to one side, talk about it a bit realistically, very simply, because I think it's a very big topic and I think it's a bit of a minefield and people can go, there's so much to consider. So we're going to just give you a few starting points. You know, today we are not going to make you GDPR compliant. We are not going to say this is what you need to do, because there's a lot you'll be needing to do. So if we move on to the next slide. I think
just adding to that, you know, we live in a world of technology now. And the Data Protection Act does not really have any input on technology, and that is a big reason why GDPR is out there. That's why it's being reiterated. And here's a good example of, I'm going to call this positive.
Yeah. I think it's important with GDPR. I think a lot of businesses turn around and go, this is going to cause us major problems. But I think the best way to look at it is to think of yourself as a data subject. And when companies like Facebook, when the Data Protection Act was put in place, Facebook didn't exist. And now all of this has come out in the news. If you haven't heard about it, I'm sure you can do a Google and that's the first thing that will come up, in which data was taken from Facebook and used by a third party, and then it had an impact on the US election. You know, GDPR will help to regulate this kind of activity and make sure that this kind of thing doesn't happen anymore.
Yeah, and I think, you know, let's talk about protection of our data. If I use Facebook in a personal world, you know, first of all, I don't want to share data with people I don't want to share it with. I have a daughter, I certainly wouldn't want her data to be shared inappropriately, and, you know, very far, but not too far-fetched, but that's where Facebook is. You know, I know that's not what our businesses are focused on, but our data is our data. We want to protect that as much as possible. And that's why it's a good thing.
So within that, and saying it's a good thing, we want to say no one is trying to stop you doing business. And we hear this a lot, well, I can't do this anymore, I can't do that anymore. And it's not about stopping you doing it, it's just making sure that you have some kind of just self-awareness of what you're actually doing with your data.
Yeah, I think to kind of put some real value on that, we get quite a lot of inquiries. We have had even people saying, why are you doing this? To emphasise, this is not to stop doing business. I know we've said it, I know it's on the slide, I know I've said it again, but is there any reason why I shouldn't contact my clients? Is there any reason I shouldn't contact people that I've been discussing potential business with? Is there any reason that we can't market to people? Absolutely not. There's absolutely fine, it's acceptable. And one thing that we will probably do is follow up today with a call to each of you over the next week or two to get some feedback. That's for us what we feel appropriate, and there's nothing that GDPR says you shouldn't be doing that. If I was to call one of you or contact one of you and says, please don't contact me anymore, absolutely fine. We will take that off, and we therefore have been trustful of your data and that communication.
Yeah, I mean, I get a lot of businesses come to me and say, well, how does that work? Because the Financial Regulation Authority, or whoever it is, I'm not in finance, says that I have to keep this for 7 years. And I'm sitting there thinking, well, that's fine then, isn't it? If there is an authority that says that you have to do that, then that's your justification for doing so. There's no one saying, there's not a single thing in GDPR that says you can't do this. It's just you have to have this justification for the reason why you're doing the things in your business. So if we move on now to where to get started with GDPR.
Yeah, I think, like I say, we want to really want to emphasise the importance of why this is out there, which was stated really, that it needs to be updated. I think you've just talked about justification as being a real key word, and I want you to kind of park that in your minds for the moment because it's key. And the other thing I'm going to say is do something, because not doing anything is not appropriate. Yeah. That is one thing I'm going to say, and it's very well us putting Facebook on there as a slide. And if I give you my personal opinion, I believe it will be the bigger organisations that will be hit first in this very early period of GDPR. But this isn't just something that starts on May and then will fizzle out in June. This will be here for a good long time. It will find its balance. So it will come and affect us, potentially all of us at some point. So we must do something and protect our businesses. So, Amy, how do we get started?
Yeah, so as we said previously, we cannot in this webinar of 15 minutes turn around and give you everything that you need to walk away and become compliant with GDPR, because that would be impossible. And if it was that easy, you all wouldn't be on this webinar anyway. So I think the big thing for me is starting out sensibly, because it is such a minefield and you can kind of get lost down the rabbit hole to a certain extent, and you can get so into the detail of it, you miss the bigger picture. So the way I like to look at GDPR is going back to the 5 W's that you might have done at school. So the first one within that is...
Sorry for taking everyone back to school.
Yeah, sorry about this. So it's who, what, when, where and why. So if we start with who, you need to sit down before you do any action, because you can't take any action without knowing where you are and what your current situation is. You need to sit down and think, whose data do I actually hold? Do I just hold employee data? Do I hold marketing data? Do I hold client data, supplier data? Whose data am I holding?
Can I just add to that?
Yeah.
Ask the whole business.
Yes, very important, definitely.
Because there could be somebody who's got a saved spreadsheet, if somebody's saved spreadsheet, if somebody's saved spreadsheet, I'm sure some of you will understand that, and suddenly they've got a copy that's on the local drive, which is different to everything else that's in the business. So please engage with everybody you can in your business.
And then once you've sat down and said, okay, these are the people's data that we hold, what does that data look like? Is it just names? Is it email addresses? And that's work email addresses as well. I want to be very clear about that. You know, is it bank details for your employees? You know, your employee next of kin? What is it that you actually hold on these people? Because some of it you might not need to hold. And then within that, the next step is always where. So where is that data being held? You know, is it on a server? Is it in the cloud? Is it in a filing cabinet that isn't locked? You know, have you got HR records that are in a filing cabinet that anybody can access? And then at the same time, you know, you think about things like, Have you got an old computer that's just sitting in a storeroom that it's not connected to the network and it's holding old data? That needs to be thought about because you are still processing that data, even if you haven't turned the computer on in 20 years.
I think you just mentioned something there, which is, perhaps briefly touched on it, and that is that a lot of people think GDPR is just about IT as well. Mm-hmm. It's about all of your data, wherever it is stored, so the filing cabinet scenario. And that's a difficult one because, let's be fair, we all keep paper records of stuff.
I think there is very much this immediate assumption that it's just digital, and it's funny really when you think that the Data Protection Act is so out of date that when this new thing has come in that we've immediately gone, oh, it's all digital, and it is still paper that you need to be thinking about. And then if we move on to the next one, which is when. I'm very sorry there isn't a question mark on that. That was my mistake. So within that when, how long have you held that data for? If you've got employee data, when did they leave and what are you holding on them? So you might have somebody that left 20 years ago and you've still got their bank details. Now those bank details might be out of date, but they also might not be. And you need to be thinking about, well, is this relevant? Should I hold that anymore? Which then brings us on to the big one that everybody needs to consider. This is the most important thing, which is why. Your justification behind holding every aspect of data is so important now. You need to always consider the why. So if you're holding somebody's middle name, do you actually need it? Because if you hold it and you don't need to, that's you're taking responsibility for something that you don't actually need to. So it's all about the justification with GDPR and why you feel you need to hold that data.
Just to kind of I always put a specific example on this. If I take ACUTEC, is it appropriate that they have details about myself as an employee? I'd say yes. They've got a lot of personal details about me in terms of name, email address, bank account details, phone number, next of kin, etc. I need them to have that so I get paid fundamentally. So we've clarified, I'm the person who've got the data of. I'm an employee. I've clarified what data they've got, which is fine. Is there any reason? Well, I've kind of mentioned things like next of kin. They need that just in case something happens to me. Is there any reason they have my father's job title? Absolutely not. There's no benefit to the business or anybody of having that. So that's what we're talking about. Question what data you have. Where is that data? So in our particular case, we have it on a server, and who has access to that? Because that's, again, very important. There's no need for everybody in the business to be able to access that data, but there's 2 or 3 people within the organisation that can do so. I guess the when part of there is perhaps a little bit more difficult. Perhaps take it back to how old is that data? And it's a good time to review things. As Amy mentioned, have my bank details changed? Obviously, I wouldn't get paid if that was the case. And then why? Why have you got the data? It might be fine that you've got my data, ACUTEC, but is it fine that I've got somebody's data from 10 years ago? You may sit there and say, absolutely it is. I need this because, and that's that key word justification that that I was talking about. So if you ask those questions and you can answer them in a positive way, that's probably means you should be keeping that data.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, definitely. So we've obviously spoken a lot about sort of data compliance and thinking about your data. We like to split GDPR into 2 aspects, which is respect and protect, which is essentially changing it from compliance and security. So the respect side of things is looking at your data, making sure it's compliant, you're doing what you're supposed to be doing with it. The second aspect of protect is understanding that because you are processing somebody's data, you have to take responsibility for that data and you have to adequately protect it. If somebody took my data, say, for example, I bought something online and that organisation took my data, it is not acceptable for them to not have adequate security precautions in place because to make their sale, they've took my data. So they need to take responsibility for it. So, which is going to bring us on to our next kind of thing, which is where our sort of expertise within GDPR comes in, which is within the security of your network and your organisation.
Yeah, we put together a 7 steps, really, and this is very focused on IT level. I'm not going to go over techie, but a bit of surface techie in this particular case. And what we feel is the minimum that you should have in place. I personally would throw the term GDPR out the window at this point, and just think about actually the satisfaction that your data is protected anyway.
And protecting your business.
And protect your business from, being compromised.
But these are the absolute basic minimum. We cannot turn around to you and say, by having these 7 steps, you're GDPR compliant. What we are saying is this is where the very basics should begin.
Yeah. So you can see great big word there, firewall. I'm sure that a lot of you got, if not all of you, got a firewall in place, which is brilliant. I'd like you to know that you have got one in place would be the question for those that don't know. We're not all IT people. We don't necessarily all take a lot of interest in what is in our IT infrastructure. Perhaps as well as knowing that you have a firewall in place, it is relevant in the sort of firewall that you have in place. So firewall tends to have software on there, and that software gets updated. As an example of this, as new, I'm going to call it hacks, are basically created, then the later software will be doing a high level of protection against them. This is basically stopping your external people getting into your infrastructure that shouldn't be. Absolutely crucial. So you want ideally a latest generation firewall. I'm not going to go and sell you a solution today. That isn't the purpose of today. So, that's the question I think you need to ask with your people.
If you do want one, you'd be very happy.
Absolutely.
But if we move on to the next step, which is patch management, do you want to tell us a bit more about patch management?
Yeah, I guess 2 levels here, really. So if we're talking about servers, first of all, there are servers that are not appropriate anymore in your business. That might be bad news to some of you. So if you, for example, got a Windows 2003 server, it's not appropriate, it's not secure, it's not supported by Microsoft, it's getting no patches to it, it's very, very risky to your business. If you have a later server than that, the important thing is it being patched? So if you've got a 2008 R2 server or 2016 server or 2012, the important thing is it being patched? Something I know that ACUTEC take a lot of pride in really is the way that we deliver a service and make sure that any servers that we look after are always security patched. And if we've got plenty of examples that we've seen in the media where there was servers that weren't NHS, I will say no more.
So if we move on to the next one, which is anti-spam.
The next couple of, I think, really very straightforward ones. Anti-spam has been around a long time, and don't feel that it's no longer needed. It is checking your junk. It is checking inappropriate emails that still come to your business. So if it gets through the firewall, your anti-spam will still pick up those inappropriate emails.
I think it's the same with antivirus as well. I mean, it seems particularly straightforward, but you've got to have a business level antivirus.
Yeah, I will kind of counter that slightly. I do speak to a lot of businesses, and they'll say, "Oh, we only put antivirus on the servers." Or we only put antivirus on the PCs. You should have it on all devices, full stop. It should just be a standard thing. We know it costs money. I recognise the downside of that. It's such an important thing, and it still does catch contentious information, contentious data coming through your network, really.
Of course. And then I guess for this one, I always think it's interesting because the ICO who are in charge of GDPR probably wouldn't care if you've got backup and disaster recovery. This is for your benefit.
Yeah, the ICO are driving of they want to protect your client data, or your employee data. So if you have the ability to be compromised, hacked, and your data is therefore taken, then you are essentially putting your clients and your employees at risk if you're not careful. If your whole server goes pop, as an example, and you lose all of that, that's not the ICO's concern. Whether that's right or wrong, there's a hard message there. So from ACUTEC's point of view, it is important having a good backup solution and having a disaster recovery plan in place is absolutely critical. Again, questions that I would be asking the business is how quickly can I recover my data in the event of? Yeah. So we used to talk about backup very much in DR from if something happens, say flood, fire or whatever to your infrastructure, We have to now talk about it if your data is compromised. Some of you may have had things like a crypto locker, and sometimes the easiest and quickest solution is to recover from backup. Okay.
I'm very conscious of time here at the moment, but if we go on to end user education, which is what you're all receiving at the moment, it is this case of making sure your staff are aware of what's going on and making sure that they are aware of how their actions can have an impact. You know, by clicking that dodgy link, you can cause a serious problem within GDPR. Make sure that your staff are receiving cybersecurity training. It is no longer acceptable to say, I don't understand IT or I don't do IT. You need to make sure that everybody is equipped to deal with IT and protect themselves. And then the last one is your IT policy. You know, you make sure that you're putting a good IT policy in place, but at the same time, we know nobody ever reads them. So what we like to recommend is that you have a sort of a front cover page in which you have the most important things on there for you in nice, plain speaking language, maybe a little bit tongue-in-cheek, just to kind of make people remember this is what's important, this is what you need to do.
One very, very quick thing, and it kind of covers a little bit of both of those, is that there is a statistic, and I do apologise because I can't remember what it is, but if you were to ask someone, will they open this email with an attachment, the majority of people will say yes in a work environment, and they won't necessarily open it in a home environment. So don't allow people to say, oh, I don't understand IT. I kind of don't accept it anymore, and that's quite a hard line to say. They're just not prepared to risk it on their own environment. They know the risk.
Yeah. So if we just one little slide.
There is one other thing, and this is above the 7 steps. There's lots of solutions out there, but this is one that we find really, really strong, and we've been using ACUTEC for 9 to 12 months, I think now. And it's something called Advanced Threat Protection. Anyone who's got Office 365, very much worth looking at. What happens is it's like an advanced anti-spam solution, really, where it's doing an additional check on the content of attachments and links. And what happens is your email comes in, you know as a user that you initially can't open it because it's being checked.
Yeah, which is very good because it kind of just reinforces that thing of you should be being very much careful. You probably shouldn't have opened this straight away without thinking about it. And it can be, it's like 3 seconds of your attachments being scanned and you sit there and go, oh, I just want to open it. But it's reinforcing that security element and it's also checking it for you. And the example on the screen is what happens if you click on a link that isn't safe.
Yeah.
Yeah. So if we move on now, this is kind of our last little bit before we wrap up and start answering questions. We are sorry we're a little bit over time.
Yeah.
Cyber essentials. So, you know, do you want to say it, Simon?
Yeah, I think all of you would have loved to have come on today and thought, can I give you a magic button to make me and have these conversations, whether it's Cyber Essentials compliant, GDPR compliant, stop the risk in my business. I'm going to be honest with you, unfortunately, the magic button doesn't exist. Hopefully we've given you some pointers and we can perhaps take more of those offline. One area that can give you that tick box of accreditation is the Cyber Essentials. So as it says there, it's a government recognised trust mark. It's run by the ICO, who essentially the commissioning body for GDPR. I think I've got my choice of words correct there.
Yes, it's supported by them. They've given it the tick mark, really.
Again, what this does is it's a question set. You're able to complete that yourself. It's £300 a year, and basically the whole process is about have you got the appropriate cyber cover? Is your password policy appropriate? Is your firewall appropriate, etc.? And therefore you have accreditation. You know, we offer that assistance to kind of get people to that stage because they may not be, and identify where they would be short. The real positive thing I have to give about this is that if you were compromised and you were investigated, if you have that Cyber Essentials accreditation, it's going to be looked on very positively. Let's drill it into things.
Yeah, it's showing that you've took the issue seriously. You actually care about your security, and it's great for a small business. You know, ISO can cost a lot. ISO can cost a lot of money to get in place. This is made for smaller businesses. It's to show that you are taking security seriously, you protect your data. So while it's not, yes, you're GDPR compliant, it's a very good step on the journey to that.
Yeah.
Right, so thank you all very much.
Yeah, we've gone a little bit longer than we wanted to talk. We are now open to your questions. So we're going to probably stay online for another 5 to 10 minutes. A little bit of summary there. It's a month to go.
Yeah, it's a month to go.
But it will be ongoing. Start doing something. Start documenting what you're doing about it, that what, why, when, etc. Perhaps think about cyber essentials. Ask the questions of your business, what data you've got, and think about what infrastructure you have. And please engage with us if you want some further discussions about it. We've whistle-stopped audit, so I'm going to look at the questions at this stage.
So what I'm going to do, I think the best thing to do is, I think we've got one question so far, but what I'm going to do is I'm just going to go here. I'm going to type in the box. And I've said hello, everybody. So in that box there, if you'd like to type any of your questions, what we're going to do is just mute for just a few minutes while you ask us any questions, and then we'll get started on answering. Okay, thank you very much. Okay, so if we're getting started now. So one of the questions that we've asked is by Donovan, and it is Windows Defender a good enough antivirus? So Simon, do you want to answer that?
Yeah, there's a couple of answers. It does depend on version. Typical IT answer to that. There is a kind of more home-orientated product, which I would say is not. But if you've got the business level paid version, then yes, it would be. It's not our particular recommended one, but that's our opinion only. So I think you should say yes. I'd say yes to that.
Okay, thank you very much. We currently don't have any questions at the moment, so I'm going to pause again. Oh, hang on, 1 second. So, can we talk about the immediate procedure if you get compromised?
Well, that's a really good question.
Okay.
The good one news is it's what Amy to answer this.
Okay, so I can't tell you an immediate process and procedure because that's for your business to kind of put on. But what I want to say is there is this whole thing about reporting a data breach. So if you have a data breach under GDPR, it's when you discover the data breach, it's not when you receive it. So you could have had a data breach 6 months ago and you don't know anything about it because you've only just discovered it. But when you discover a data breach, if it has had a negative, if it will have a negative impact on the data subject, and that can be taken in your own capacity of how you feel that would be a negative impact. But I would recommend you notify them anyway, to be honest. You have to notify them within 72 hours, the ICO. If you fail to notify the ICO within 72 hours, you can receive further fines. So you can receive a 2% fine of your global annual turnover or 10 million euros, whichever is greater. So I think it's very important to think about your process if you were to receive a data breach. The other aspect of it is, in some cases, you might have to inform those data subjects that breach has occurred. I would perhaps put in place a PR strategy for that. If you have to tell a lot of your clients that their data has been breached, that's a negative impact on your reputation. You need to think about your crisis control for what would happen if you did need to.
I would kind of take a little bit of a backward step to that as well. It may be that what you're referring to is that you have had, I'm going to just use crypto locker as an example because I think it's been on the media a lot. It may be that they've only been able to encrypt your data and not necessarily been able to gather any data. So you may not need to go quite through those channels. Obviously the first thing to do is to speak to your IT company and judge the actual issue. The one thing not to do is pay anybody in terms of if when you try and open a file as an example like this and they want $500 or whatever, bitcoins or whatever, don't pay it. Speak to your IT company, and I would kind of let them guide you down that route a little bit as well. Okay. If it is bigger, then a little bit bigger, then that's where Amy is coming in, and that's accurate.
I've immediately assumed the worst has occurred. So if we go on, which is nothing normal. So if we go on to, I had an email, question from Miriam. I would like Miriam to just kind of reiterate what she's trying to say and then we'll answer it. She's asked, is there a product that will check outgoing emails for any data? What do you mean by that?
I might be able to answer this. It's a little bit of a more specific one, which is probably why I'm asking for a bit more information. There are things out there where you can control who can access that data. May not be exactly what you're asking. So, for example, let's say I was to send information of a payroll nature, but I only want certain people to have access to that. Obviously, what can happen at the moment is I could send somebody that email and then they can do something with that. Mm-hmm. So they could forward it to anybody without me knowing. So there is a product out there which I'm more than happy probably to talk offline in this particular case, which does allow you to have control of that in terms of you can restrict the actions, so you can prevent from forwarding, you can prevent from editing that attachment, you can prevent from printing, reply. All you can do essentially is reply to the person who sent to you, and that's it. So there are things out there, but it might be a little bit more involvement in that.
Mm-hmm. That's exactly what she was talking about. Perfect. So well done. So within that, we've also had another question, which is, are there any letter of consent templates we can use for use internally? Within this, from Phil, it depends what you're asking for consent for. In some cases, you might not need consent. What I'm going to talk about here is, I get a lot of people say to me, well, we need to ask for consent, and we need opt-ins straight away. And I just want you to take a little bit of a step back. Phil, I recognise your name, but I can't think what company you're from. I'm very sorry. But if you are a B2B business, you might not need to ask for consent, because there's 6 legal bases for processing data. And yes, one of those is consent, but then another is legitimate interest. So what I'd like perhaps is maybe for a little bit more information, just to understand what you're asking for consent for, to understand if that's the most appropriate thing. But there are templates out there that you can use, and I'm sure a lot of you are starting to receive emails from companies asking for consent in the situation where they do need consent. So for example, I've had emails off Facebook asking for consent. So yes, it just depends on the nature of the business and what you need the consent for, just to check if you actually do need consent.
The one thing we haven't particularly mentioned, and that is B2B versus B2C. B2C will be hit a little bit harder regarding GDPR. Mm-hmm. Again, I guess it's that protection of personal data, so we feel that that's where a lot of these things will begin. It doesn't mean we ignore it as a B2B, but it's going to be driven a little bit more B2C.
Right, thank you very much. Right, so just give me one moment. I have received another question, but it's been in my inbox because the lady is on the phone. So the question we've got here is about the right to forget. So if they get a request to remove a client's data, do they need to remove them from the backup and physical archive as well? It's a very interesting question. So within that, yes, I guess it is a difficult question. Simon, do you have any?
I reckon that's one of the best ones.
Yeah, it's one of the best ones.
As I stumble trying to think of the correct answer.
Can I just say here as well, because it is something that we haven't said on this session, and we usually do. We aren't providing you with legal advice. I just want to point that out.
Everything is allegedly. I guess the answer to that is yes. I'm going to be really honest. It's a very good question, not something that I've been asked before. But yeah, I guess if it's on your backups, then yes, you should be getting rid of it. I think we have to put a realistic provision in place here. And how do we actually do that? And because what you can't afford to do is your business suddenly just be about getting GDPR compliant and not be in businesses that, let's be fair, are profitable organisations.
It's about being practical to a certain extent. So to give an example, which is not about backups, but I was told by a data company that if they had a GDPR plan and that they would refresh data every 3 months or so, that's not practical, because it would have to keep being re-imported into our CRM system, and it's that kind of thing where how practical is that for a business of certain sizes?
I think there's more focus on what you're doing with that data a little bit as well.
Mm-hmm. Definitely, but it is a very good question.
I'll be honest, I can sort of half answer it, and I'm not convinced I can 100% answer it, if I'm really honest.
I think that the best thing to do, if that is something that you're particularly concerned about, is the ICO do have a small business hotline. So very sorry about that, we just had a little bit of an audio interruption. So if you do want to contact the ICO, there is a hotline there for you to ask specific questions like this that might be specific to your business, because at the end of the day, every business is different. So what I'm going to just quickly do is just pause again, see if we've got any more questions. Well, I have had another question via email, which I didn't spot before. I'm ever so sorry, Danielle. So Danielle has asked, should we have something in place in our employee contracts to state that they are happy for us to store their data? Do we need to be specific about what data we are holding, for example, bank details, addresses, etc.? Right, okay. So again, this is one of these things where it's like, I'm not going to give you legal advice. However, you have to think about the legal basis in which you're holding that employee data. So you know what I said before, whose data you're holding. Your legal basis for each one will be different. So your legal basis for holding marketing data will be different to your legal basis for holding employee data. So you might choose to hold your employee data based on legitimate interest, because at the end of the day, to run as a business and to actually employ those people, you can't really do it without you've got a legitimate interest to do so.
I think in a very black and white way, I think to answer this one is, do you want paid?
Yeah, I think that's a very good point. Do you want to be paid? If you want to ask for consent, then I guess you can. But the way I would look at it, and again, I am not a lawyer, but if you put in your contract, it is our legitimate interest as a business under GDPR to hold this data for you, and they sign that contract, I don't see a problem with it. But I'm not a HR expert. I am not a lawyer. I know a lot of HR companies will have GDPR policies being put in place.
I think it's a little bit like, without taking it out of context, I went into a shop and they asked, do you mind if you have your email address, and we can send as a receipt. I did ask the question, is it going to be used for marketing? And they actually said, yes, but you can unsubscribe. Well, if I want to receive that marketing, then they're going to hold my data. So there's no kind of way around it, really, from that point of view.
Exactly. I hope that's answered the question. Just give me 1 second. We're just going to mute again just to review the questions. 1 second. So we have had another question from Donovan again. Donovan has asked, if we're holding data on a cloud CRM like Salesforce, whose responsibility is it to protect that data? Is it theirs or is it Salesforce's? Simon, do you have an answer to this?
I think probably the best way to answer this is you are responsible for what data is in there, but if in this specific example, Salesforce have provisioned a hosted solution for you, then they are responsible if their infrastructure was compromised.
I think that's actually a very good way. I think that within that, it's that respect and protect thing again. You're responsible for the respect of the data, but to a certain extent, Salesforce is protecting it. But you have to see yourself as a data controller, and Salesforce is the data processor for yourself.
However, what's to stop someone exporting a list of that data from their employee, and they leave and they've taken that data with them? That is not Salesforce's fault. So all Salesforce will be there to protect the, I'm going to call it, sorry, it sounds dull, but the compromising of that infrastructure, because it's no different to, if you've got a server on premise, you're responsible for the compromise of that server there. If it's a hosted one, then you are essentially paying for that protection on the hosted solution. But the content of that data, someone can still get that out, who could be an employee as an example, and then extract it from Salesforce and distribute it out.
I think it's also important to say that as the data controller, you are choosing to hold that data, but you are also choosing Salesforce. So while Salesforce does have some kind of responsibility as the processor, no one forced you to go with Salesforce at the end of the day. That was your decision. So it's kind of checking that what you're choosing is correct for you.
Sorry, Andy. One thing I perhaps should say there is that everyone should pay a little bit of due diligence when looking at cloud solutions in terms of what sort of cloud solution it is and where it's hosted. I can only really speak strongly from a Microsoft perspective. I can sales pitch if you want here, but generally speaking, when we look at hosting, we look at Microsoft Azure. One of the reasons is purely because they are GDPR compliant. So they take responsibility for that.
Microsoft have taken GDPR very seriously. I think they were the first of the cloud, sort of the big cloud services to sort GDPR out for themselves.
Yeah. The company called I Love Cloud and I'm going to hold your data. There might be a bit more sanity checking that you want to do.
Yeah.
I've made that one up, by the way.
Yeah, they might not exist. So yeah, thank you very much. We currently don't have any more questions. We will just mute for 5 more seconds and then we will sign off if there's no more. Okay, everybody, it seems like there's no more questions for today. I will say, because I can see that there's still quite a few of you still sitting on the webinar. I know that sometimes you do sit there and think, I don't want to ask the question in public, I'd rather have a private conversation. We completely get that and we're completely open to that. So if you'd like to give us a call or email us and just have a bit of a chat about it rather than in this sort of domain, then that's absolutely fine and we welcome that. But we are going to sign off now. So thank you very much for listening to the webinar. I hope it's been useful to you. Again, if you're thinking about Cyber Essentials, if you're thinking about putting some security aspects in place, then do get in touch, or if you just have a question, then that is fine. My email address is there. You can call us on 01675 469 020 as well. And thank you very much for joining us today.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye.